EMP Series, Day 174. Carl Fairley arrived in town early, as usual. He tied off his horse and walked over toward the diner for a coffee. Frank walked along the platform and signaled to Carl when he saw him crossing the road. Frank told Carl that he had done the morning rounds and that all was quiet. Carl looked at him. "Okay, great. You got an early start, huh?" Frank responded, "Yeah, usually get up pretty early. Just figured I'd come in and get started. After everything that's been happening, I just figured it made sense to get going early, sir." "Outstanding, Frank," said Carl. "Did you have a chance to check in with the railroad office to see what time the train would be rolling in?" "Yes, sir. It's scheduled for noon." "Okay, great. Do me a favor, Frank. Drop the sirs. We aren't military. I'm just Carl, okay?" "Okay, sir, Carl." Carl chuckled. "Relax, Frank. Let's go get breakfast. I'm buying." "Yes, sir, Carl. Sorry, some habits are hard to break. But breakfast sounds good, Carl." Lou Webb, a local farmer, was finishing up a delivery of milk and eggs at the diner when he saw Frank and Carl sitting at a table drinking coffee. He walked up, tipped his hat to Carl. "Morning, Constable. Deputy." Carl nodded, and Frank responded, "Morning, sir." Carl asked, "Hey, Lou, how's everything going out at your place?" "Oh, just fine, Carl, just fine. Hey, listen, my brother-in-law was at that meeting yesterday at the Baptist church where y'all attend. He said you gave a little speech about the military and they're sticking their noses in things around here." "Well, yeah, words to that effect, I guess." "Well, Carl, thing is, he told me your position, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm in complete agreement. Most others here are too." He looked around as he said it, with a quiet tone. "Just so you know, you ain't alone. If you need more men, well, I figure there's a lot of us out here that would throw in with you." "Thanks, Lou. I appreciate it. We're going to try to do things by the book, for now anyway. But it's good to know there's support out here." "Well, Carl, just remember, if and when the time comes, we got a few people willing to help. Have a good day, Constable. Deputy." "Later, Lou." Major Stillman walked in and directly over to the counter. The man behind the counter pulled the bag from under and slid it toward the Major. He placed a large cup of coffee next to it and went back to what he was doing. Major Stillman opened the bag, stuck his nose in it. "Ah, smells good. I can tell you remembered to put bacon on it today. Thanks. I'll see you tomorrow." He grabbed his free breakfast and headed toward the door. He saw Carl. Their eyes locked for a second. He quickly looked away without addressing him as he walked out the door. "You two know each other?" Frank asked. "Oh, yeah," answered Carl. "That there is Major Stillman. He's in charge of the troops here. Real piece of work he is. In for his first free meal of the day. He's an oxygen thief." "How's that?" Frank asked. Carl repeated, "An oxygen thief. You know, someone who's stealing the very air he breathes." Frank looked around at Carl with a confused look. Carl expounded. "You know, a waste of human flesh. Worthless. He serves no productive purpose. An oxygen thief." "Oh, yeah," Frank said, "like that." Carl and Frank's breakfast arrived at the table. Carl said a prayer of blessing for the food, and they ate. Tyler Hobbs was in town. He went over to the trading post to pick up some supplies, to drop off a couple gallon containers of freshly picked blackberries that he wanted to try to barter. He told the clerk that he was looking for a hand-crank meat grinder and a grain mill. He was willing to trade the berries for either one. He had used the last of the gas in his generator and was now without the use of his electric appliances. The clerk told him that he himself would trade him 2 gallons of gas for the berries. Tyler chose to hold out and to try to get the crank items instead. He reasoned that going forward, gas would become harder to get. He wanted to be able to operate without it. On his way out, he ran into George Henderson, who stopped him on the platform. "Hobbs, don't forget about that special board meeting tonight. I'll see you there." "Indeed you will, Mr. Henderson. I wouldn't miss it." Then George Henderson stepped in close to Tyler and looked directly into his eyes and said, "Hobbs, you better get in line, back the Major up. This region would be a wasteland by now without him and his troops. Those people that want them out are delusional. Where do you think this area would be without them? Chaos, that's where." Now, when we ask for comments and opinions from the board members, you better be with us if you know it's good for you. With that, he poked Tyler in the chest with his finger. Tyler reached out and grabbed his forefinger in his fist, pulled it backward until it drove Henderson to his knees. A soldier on duty on the platform rushed over and got in between the 2 men, freeing Henderson from Tyler's grip and restraining him. As he held Tyler back, he sternly told George Henderson, "I'll voice my opinion and place my support where I see fit, Henderson. And if you know what's good for you, you won't be threatening me again, or I promise you will regret it." The soldier pulled Tyler back away from Henderson and cautioned him to calm him down. Henderson rose up to his feet and shouted at Hobbs, "These troops are the best thing to happen to this region since the stupid EMP attack. You're a bully and a menace, Tyler Hobbs. You always were. Why don't you go live out in the woods with the other animals if you don't like it here?" Tyler, who was walking away at this point, stopped and turned to face George Henderson. "Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Do those words mean anything to you? You, sir, are a coward and a traitor. You would prefer to let men like Major Stillman come in, run this country, and control every move you make, like a master controls a dog. Stand up for yourself. Take back your town, your home, your dignity. Stop licking the boots of the tyrants and get up off of your knees, man. You're pathetic." And with that, he turned and walked away. George Henderson stood like a deer in the headlights there on the platform. A small crowd had gathered at the commotion and watched as Tyler Hobbs redressed Henderson. Some started clapping and others cheered. George Henderson turned and walked back down the street from the direction he had come from. At the church, Greg and Steve placed their rifles behind the seat of the power wagon. Both men carried .45 caliber sidearms. Each had several spare magazines loaded with hollow point ammo. Whenever a security detail left the property, Greg insisted that they coordinate their weapons so that they carried the same caliber, so that if it became necessary to share ammo, they could do so easily. Steve jumped in the back of the truck. Greg drove with Pastor sitting behind him. They were on their way to pick up Ish Patel and head into town for the board meeting. Frank and Carl had just finished the evening rounds on Main Street, and Carl invited Frank to attend the meeting with him. Frank asked Carl if he was expecting trouble, and Carl said he didn't think so, but it wouldn't hurt to have backup just in case. "Count me in," Frank said. As the board members started to arrive and settle in, Major Stillman and Congressman Holmes left the Major's office and headed toward the post to go upstairs for the meeting. Once out in the street, they saw a small crowd gathering to go up as well. "What the? Are all these people here for the board meeting, Stillman?" asked Holmes. "I suppose they are, Congressman." "Great. Just what we need," responded the Major. Congressman Holmes stopped and told Major Stillman, "I'm not going in there. I thought we were going in to meet with a few members who needed to be swayed into accepting your presence here, Stillman. This looks more like a lynch mob. I'm not interested in doing this," Holmes explained. "Go up there and make an excuse for me. Tell them I had an emergency business which required my immediate attention." Then he looked directly at Stillman and told him, "You get this board under control, Stillman, or I'll bring someone in who can. If you can't handle these local yokels, then maybe I'd better rethink my choice of putting you in charge of this operation. And I hope I don't need to explain to you how vital this area is to our mission." "Yes, sir, Congressman. I'll handle it, sir. Rest assured." "I won't be resting until all this thing is locked down. Now get in there and do your job." "Yes, sir." With that, the Major went upstairs and took his seat. Leroy McMillan called the meeting to order and gave a few opening comments. He turned the floor over to Major Stillman, who apologized for Congressman Holmes, who was called away on an urgent matter at the last minute, and therefore could not attend tonight's meeting. There was some grumbling from the crowd. Ish Patel questioned the Major about the previous vote to recommend troop withdrawal from the region, and asked what the status of that action was at this time. Major Stillman, trying to be somewhat evasive, assured him that the results of the vote had been passed up the chain of command, but no decision was made yet. Then he reminded the board that it was the governor of the state that implemented martial law, and that it was he alone who was responsible for lifting that order as well, if and when the time came. "You all can vote for anything you want, but it has no bearing on the rule of law. This board is merely in place to advise and administer certain policy issues. That is all. It has no authority to enforce any terms of any order issued outside its area of jurisdiction or governance. Frankly, whether or not you all want us here or not means very little in the grand scheme of things." With that, the crowd began to voice its displeasure with the Major. They grew louder until nobody could hear anything anyone was saying. Leroy McMillan stood and smashed the gavel down against the desk several times, shouting for order among the crowd. Major Stillman sat smugly smirking at the disorder. Carl Fairley caught his gaze, and the smirk disappeared from the Major's face immediately. Carl stood on his feet and walked out of the room. From outside on the platform, Carl could hear the crowd clearly. He mounted up and rode off. Frank followed them out and made his way downstairs. When he walked out onto the platform, Carl was gone. McMillan called the meeting to a close because of the chaos and disorder. The crowd dispersed, and the board members met in private. They closed the meeting to everyone that wasn't a member of the board, including Major Stillman. In the closed session, they discussed their options and their next course of action. There was much discussion and argument among the group. McMillan asserted that because he believed Stillman was right about the government being the only one that could rescind the martial law order, that there was nothing more that could be done. Pastor Sharps reminded him that the citizens were not going to accept that, and that there would be trouble if the military was not made to leave. He reminded them also that they as a board had voted for troop removal. McMillan stood up and said that the vote passed by a narrow margin and so was not completely representative of their opinions. Tyler Hobbs said, "That's what democracy is. The majority rules, whether by a narrow margin or a landslide. The vote stands." Just then, George Henderson stood up and declared that he was changing his vote. He was now of the opinion that the military should withdraw and control of the region should be returned to the people. He looked over at Tyler Hobbs and stated to the group, "Government of the people, by the people, and for the people." Hobbs shook his head in acknowledgement. Ish Patel asserted that now the margin was even wider. The board's responsibility to the people was to push the agenda of troop removal. McMillan, the last lone dissenter, cried outrage and warned the group that Major Stillman would not be pleased and that the military was not going to go peacefully. Then he stated that as long as the martial law order was still in place, there would be little that the board could do. Carl Fairley sat in his barn alone. He penned a letter that he planned to hang on the bulletin board at the trading post in town. It read, "Citizens, the duly appointed Board of Governors for this region has lawfully voted in favor of military troop withdrawal from this area. As of this evening, they have refused to consider this vote or even to pass the results thereof up their chain of command. Tonight, at a special board meeting, our invited guest, Congressman Ted Holmes, refused to attend. Major Stillman, the troop commander, seemed pleased at the chaos that ensued during the meeting. It is clear to me that he has no intention of honoring the vote taken by the board, or even allowing its results to be considered by his superiors. This is unacceptable. More than 200 years ago, this nation was formed out of the desire to be free of the tyranny of King George and the British Empire. Today, we face a tyrannical government once again, a government that refuses to allow us to lead our own community. Since the EMP attack and the financial collapse that ensued in this nation, we have been plunged into a state of total chaos. We have struggled, and some of us have even given up their lives to regain order and control. While I have been against military involvement from the start, I allowed the will of the citizens of this region to prevail, even though I knew in my heart that no good would come from their involvement. I stood back and did not resist as they came in and took over. They took over our town. They took control of the railroad, and they took control of our very lives. Friends and neighbors, I could no longer stand by and do nothing. I submit that we, as honest, hard-working, and law-abiding, decent people, take control of our homes and our region back from this oppressive, tyrannical regime that now holds it. I submit that we first make every last attempt to reach a peaceful resolution to this problem. I am attaching a petition to this letter calling for the governor of this state to rescind the order for martial law and allow us to govern ourselves again at the county level with state oversight, as it has been done for the past 200 plus years. In this petition, I am asking him to also order the immediate removal of the troops from this region. Elsewhere in this state, similar actions are being taken to form local county governments. Here, however, Because of the river valley and the railway and hydroelectric services that once operated, the military seeks to hold control and to rebuild these services for their own purposes. I am holding a meeting at my farm next Sunday after church services to plan our collective course of action. Every citizen of this area is welcome to attend. It is time for decisive action to be taken. Make no mistake that the time for rhetoric has ended. The Board of Governors, which represents the citizens of this region, has voted, and the results of that vote have been made public. The only acceptable option left is that of total troop withdrawal. Together, we will sign and send this petition directly to the governor of this state. We will allow him a proper amount of time to act upon it. Everyone who attends next Sunday's meeting should be ready and willing to stand together as one in the event that the governor does not honor the will of the people in this matter. I have stated previously, and I will state again, that I would prefer to die on my feet than to serve on my knees. People, it is time to get off your knees and stand together on your own feet. Thank you all. He signed the letter in unity. Carl W. Fairley.